Alright, in this video we're going to talk about the Earth's groundwater, surface water, as well as human activity and the effects that we can have on the water sources. Basically, this one's going to be covering about 7.8c, which is model the effects of human activity on groundwater and surface water. So, part of this starts with the water cycle. You go through and, the sun drives the water cycle. That's what allows for the evaporation from the water sources, your bodies of water, your lakes, oceans, creeks, rivers, all that, ponds, ditches. And then what you've got here is your transpiration, which is where it's pulling water out of plants, the leaves, and all that type of stuff. Then you got your condensation, which builds up in the air, forms your clouds and stuff, and then once they get so much, that's when your rainfall or your precipitation will then release the condensation in the form of rain, or depending on your altitude, and if it's cold enough, your precipitation could be snow. Now, what you have here is you're going to go through and have your groundwater, which absorbs in. So it's this line here that you've got your groundwater going. Your surface water is your water that's on the surface. So you're going to have your big lakes like this one here, which is dammed up, and then it's released and it runs out to the oceans, to the coast. You also have your runoff that comes down from the mountains, your water that may melt down and come off down through streams and all that, that'll feed off into it. Now, like I said, you kind of got the whole hydrologic cycle. Same thing what we were talking about, just a different picture is going through. You still got your transpiration that comes up, your evaporation, water that ends up all getting out into the ocean. Due to it pulling down and elevation, you've got what's called sea level, stuff like that. So at sea level, your elevation is right there. Now you've got your mountains and stuff that are going to go down, and as it goes down, elevation-wise, it's going to filter down all into it. Usually your smaller bodies of water will lead into bigger ones, such as larger rivers, stuff like that, that will then end up feeding out into the ocean. So your fresh water will end up pouring out into the ocean, into like gulfs, different streams, or as you go. Now, like I said, same thing. You've got your freshwater storage that you'll have. You've got surface runoff, snow melt runoff. So as it gets cooler in certain areas that aren't just frozen all times because of elevation, what you're up, you're going to have the water that comes in, and as it melts, it runs down, feeds in, and then gradually out to the ocean. Now, as you're going to go through, you've got water, which is about, of your oceans, 97% is going to be salt water, your ocean water. Now, of that, 3% is your fresh water that you have on the earth. So the bulk of our water, which we all know you have more water than land, is all going to be your oceans and stuff. Now, part of your fresh water, of this 3%, 70% of the 3%, I know we're going to math on you here, but 70% of this fresh water that we have on the earth is in the form of glaciers, frozen, and stuff like this. Now, the other part that gets to where we're using and stuff is your aquifers, which are underground. You have like about 29% of the water is in aquifers or underground type. And then 1% is your lakes, rivers, and streams. So of that, you're going to go through and you see that all the lakes, all the waters you see on a daily basis, on the whole world, you put all those together, and you're still only sitting at around 1% of the total that you actually have. Now, like I said, only 30% of it is actually in liquid form. So your other is the 70. Now, as we go through, like I said, you got your underground or your groundwater. So the rest of it, like I said, only the 1% is where you can see it on the surface. Now, as I was talking, you've got Snow that falls on the mountains and stays a long time. Some of your peaks, if they're high enough, they may be there for tens of thousands of years. They may not be like some areas where, okay, we got snow during the winter and it all thawed out. Now it's just regular mountains in the spring and as it goes into the summer. When it does finally melt, it fills into the other surface area, like I was talking about, due to elevation changes. It goes downhill. So you'll get your rivers fill up and different stuff like that. Now, you've also got your surface water, but the problem is some of your surface water, you have runoff and different things. So this is where some of the time you'll have human activity can come into effect here, because of what we do can affect how nature goes back. Nature's going to do its own thing, but we may add certain things to it to where it affects it. So you've got fertilizer and all here, so if Farmer John over here uses certain chemicals and stuff on his crops, well, when it rains, that runoff is going to go off into the streams and different stuff, so now you're getting chemicals into it. You may have your discharge stream over here. You'll hear of chemical plants and all that, illegal dumping and all. So they may be putting illegal chemicals into it. Well, they may have adverse effects to, it depends on the type of plant that's dumping this stuff in. It may pollute the water, kill all the fish in that area. Same thing, you may end up causing a whole species of fish to get wiped out if that's only in that area, especially if you're upstream, because as it runs downstream, it's affecting everything downstream. So if you're up here and this diagram here shows you thousands of miles of river, then you're polluting thousands of miles. Now you're going to have worse effect up here, but it's going to follow the water, so it can affect habitats all the way down the stream. Same thing with the smog and all that. It can get up there and it can affect the rain. You get different stuff on like acid rain, different stuff. You've got your soil. The chemicals can get off into it. They can affect the soil to where your plants won't grow. So if you got corn, it may come up already dead, won't even grow, or it affects the soil to where the stuff that does grow is polluted, and the animals that eat it then get sick from that. So this up here could all lead over to here, and the cows may die just because of the plant. Or you may have city pollution stuff in the sewers that get dumped out. And all this human activity can affect it. That's why you have conservationists, different organizations that'll go through trying to help the environment and all. Now, as I was talking about, all the water runs down. So you've got the top elevation, it runs down as it goes back out to the sea level or to the ocean. So all this little stuff feeds into the larger parts, and then it'll feed out into it. So any spots here that you have that may have some human activity affecting it in a negative way, from that point on can potentially affect the whole thing. So if you've got illegal chemicals at the farm here, they can affect this strip here from there down. Now, if you've got currents and stuff, it's not so much going to affect up, but that's still a significant chunk that you could have being affected from human activity. You could also have where if you built a dam here to build water back up, you may neglect, or not neglect, but you may keep the water from being able to go down to others where animals needed it to survive, to drink, or whatever, so they may have to migrate to other areas. Now, like I said, it'll go through, and this is all called a watershed. So everything that contributes to the water, to the river system is called a watershed. And there's multiple different watersheds. So you may have that one, you may have all the different ones, but after the whole thing's done, it will flow out into the ocean, like I said. So like right here, you've got a big watershed, and all the precipitation that falls in the area will eventually fall out. So how this is done in the elevation of the United States, this feeds down into like here. So that's why you have the Mississippi, it'll be a major outlet for this water flowing through, because you're catching the mountains that flow here, and it goes down through here because of elevation and gravity. Now, Texas has major river basins, coastal basins, major bays, different stuff like that. As it's sorted here, I know this is all blurry and stuff, but these are like the major watersheds that we have in Texas. So we're over in this area, so our watershed is going to be over there. Now, we're going to go through, like I said, you've got a whole bunch though. I'm not going through all of them, but you can kind of see. Same thing with ecoregions. Texas has a whole bunch of different ecoregions that can be affected as well. Now, your surface water, eventually it can be absorbed down and go in town to what's called the water table. That's like your water line that's underground, your saturation zone. So the more rain you get, the higher it may come. That's where you get flooding. It won't evaporate as fast. Now, your groundwater, like it's labeled here, is right above the aquifer, your permeable rock and stuff. Your water table sits on top of that. As it goes through, you got the permeable rock, and it'll go through. Now your water table, like I said, it's the boundary that's at the top of your groundwater zone. So all of it's down, your water table sits there. So the more you have, this is all saturated, which means it's just full of water, it's not gonna hold anymore. This is unsaturated, so if it rains, it'll absorb in. So the more rain you get, the more moisture that you're gonna get. So you may get saturated to the point where if you walk, it's squishy, stuff like that, because it's done and it hasn't either evaporated or been absorbed fully down in through the layers. Now, like I said, so you got the water table, it's just a bunch of different views to where you can kind of see. Your zone of saturation, once again, that's all this right here that is completely just absorbed in through the ground. So if you were to dig here and go through, you're gonna start hitting the water at some point, and like with farmers, they'll dig wells and different stuff. They're digging down to get into this area here so that they can pump the water out. Now your zone of saturation is also, some call it the aquifer and stuff. You've got your recharge zones. I'm not going to get into all that, but that's where, as you have it, it'll recharge, then it goes through to where it can come back up, because it'll go back up and down depending on if you haven't had water and whatnot. Same thing, human activity though, if you've got chemicals and stuff that get washed down, they can be absorbed into the soil and even get down into the water. So if you have illegal dumping, it can get into that aquifer and completely contaminate the whole body of water that's underground. Now, afterwards, it's recharged by precipitation, water runoff, all that. So as it comes in, it'll fill back up over time. Like I said, I was talking also, your water table, you've got it. So right here, you've got the pumping well. So if any of y'all have, cattle wells that y'all dug or whatever, this is what they've done. They'll dig down until they hit water. Sometimes it's here, sometimes it's here, sometimes it's here. Just depends on how deep they have to get and how much piping they have to use. So, the oceans is all where it ends up. The water from the watersheds is filled in. Now you also have your rivers, streams, and runoff. They carry water and everything else, like I'm talking about. Litter, pollution. So you have these sea turtles that you may have seen the video of, that's got a bendy straw shoved up its nose. You got the little Coke things, they tell you, make sure you cut those just in case, because you'll see the different animals that have them stuck in their head where they got it stuck on and then they've grown across it. Anything we do can affect the environment. Whether you just throw out your McDonald's wrapper, whatever, out of the window, it can affect the environment. Usually, sadly, what we do can affect it in a negative way, not as much a positive way. That's why you got to make sure of what you're doing. So, just a couple of little tidbits. So we talked about 1% of it was the groundwater. About 1/100th of the 1% of water on Earth is in the rivers. It takes 39,090 gallons of water to make a new car, which includes the tires. So through the plant, them doing all that, it'll have that. you have over 17 million houses that use private wells for their drinking water supply. Now that's changing all the time because it's easier for them to go through and get that. And then, like I said, you can live about a month without food, but you're gonna live roughly a week without water. So, overall, kind of reviewing up, anything we do is going to affect the groundwater and the surface water that we have on here. Anything, like I said, that we dump, any of that stuff. So you have to be mindful of what we're doing as humans to affect the environment around you. That's why they always, recycle, reuse, different stuff. So that's it on groundwater, surface water, and our activities and how they affect them.